Chinese president arrives in France. Xi Jinping set to dine with Emmanuel Macron near Nice tonight. His visit comes days after Paris suggested Europe needed a coherent approach in dealing with China. Thailand's pro-junta party unexpectedly takes the lead in the first election since a military coup in 2014. The announcement coming from the Election Commission with 90% of the votes counted. And a Norwegian luxury cruise liner gets towed to port after experiencing engine trouble on Saturday. According to the Red Cross, many of the passengers will need care after the trauma they experienced on board. Thank you very much for joining us here on France 24. The Chinese president is in France today. Xi Jinping paid a visit to Monaco this Sunday as the principality seeks to boost ties with China. Later this evening, he will be dining with the French president near the city of Nice before signing a string of contracts tomorrow in Paris. The visit comes days after Emmanuel Macron criticized Italy for signing on to China's Belt and Road Initiative, preferring a coherent European approach when dealing with Beijing.
Xi Jinping on a European push to forge support for a new Silk Road known as the Belt and Road Initiative. The Chinese president has already signed a memorandum of intent with Italy, the first G7 country to take part. Now Xi will try and convince French President Emmanuel Macron during his 3-day state visit. But it may be a tough sell. Speaking at an EU summit on Friday, Macron called for Europe to wake up regarding the bloc's trade relations with Beijing.
We put ourselves in a situation where Chinese investments have taken over strategic infrastructure and network assets. I think it was a strategic mistake.
France wants to unify the EU's position on China, and as part of those efforts, German Chancellor Angela Merkel and EU Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker will join Tuesday's meeting with the Chinese president. But before that, Macron and Xi will discuss bilateral deals. A year after Macron's visit to Beijing, where many contracts were signed, an order for 184 Airbus planes worth about 18 billion euros could be inked, according to sources at the Élysée Palace. And both sides say they're committed to implementing the Paris Climate Agreement. Macron, too, has promised to press Beijing on its human rights record, most notably concerns over the persecution of the country's Uyghur Muslim minority, including allegations of mass internments in Xinjiang province.
Thais headed to the polls this Sunday for the first time since a military coup in 2014. Partial results show the pro-military party with a slight lead, with 90% of the votes counted. Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha is looking to extend his grip on power. This after a new political system was engineered aiming to stifle the influence of parties not aligned with the military. Earlier, I spoke to Daniel Quinlan in Bangkok for the latest.
The latest we saw was 92% of the vote counted and the pro-military party still in the lead. The two major parties have traded the front spot all night, which in itself is a bit of a surprise and a disappointment for the anti-military party Pheu Thai. They were expecting to do better and to be the largest party tonight. It's certainly not as bad as the showing of the Democratic Party, or the Democrats, I should say. They're Thailand's oldest party, and their vote totally collapsed tonight. It was cannibalized by two new parties, one of them Future Forward, and another new party that competed in elections for the first time tonight. That's going to be a bit of a shock, and already it's resulted in the resignation of the head of the Democrat Party. He's the former Prime Minister, Abbassat, and that resignation probably paves the way for them to join with the pro-military parties in negotiations in the coming days.
Daniel, how are people likely to react to this result, what we're seeing now, this trend?
Well, already on Twitter, people have been posting under a hashtag Pray for Thailand. So for a lot of people, it's going to be a disappointing result. Obviously, for opposition members who were supporting Future Forward, tonight's been a surprisingly good result in a good way. They didn't exist as a party a year ago, and I think they've really outperformed expectations. But overall, I think it's a disappointing night for the Democratic camp here. It seems like with the upper house, it's going to be very difficult to stop Prime Minister Prayut from regaining his office as Prime Minister. But we'll have to see as negotiations take place over the coming days and possibly weeks.
Daniel Quinlan reporting there from Bangkok earlier. Now, rescue workers are racing against the clock to help evacuate tens of thousands of people displaced by Cyclone Idai. Members of the Indian and South African militaries have joined aid groups looking for any signs of life as the search now enters its second week. More than 700 people have been confirmed dead in Mozambique, Zimbabwe and Malawi. And aid workers expect those numbers to rise as waters recede. Shirley Sitbon reports.
A week after the cyclone and flooding, water is receding on the Buzi River. In recent days, fishermen have transported families up and down the river. Most have abandoned their devastated villages and are hoping to find refuge in Beira. Others go the opposite direction, back to their destroyed homes, hoping to find relatives they have had no news of.
I feel bad, very sad, because firstly, I had a house here in Buzi, and this house is now totally destroyed. What was left by the cyclone was taken by the floods.
They lack food, water and shelter, but for many like this mother, that's not what's most important.
I'm happy to see her alive. And on the other hand, I'm sad because I have another daughter in Kilimani for school purposes. I'm sad because there's no communication. I don't know how she's surviving, if she's even alive.
As people search for refuge, they think of the day the cyclone hit their communities.
In 5 minutes, everything was flooded. There wasn't anything anyone could do. We had no boats, so people crawled up into the trees.
Many of those who couldn't climb died. Others perished after days of waiting for rescue. The goal now is to improve sanitation and hygiene to avert the spread of disease, the next major threat.
A delegation from the United Nations arrived in Mali earlier today, this following an attack on 134 Fulani people who were killed on Saturday. The attack happened in central Mali in an area known for frequent intercommunal violence. Women and children were included amongst the dead. Here's what the UN Special Representative had to say.
In the face of this unspeakable tragedy, I personally, as the Secretary General's Special Representative, call against this spiral of violence. As part of our mandate to protect civilians, as soon as we learned the information, a MINUSMA Rapid Reaction Force was immediately deployed to the scene of the incident.
Now, the future of Brexit remains up in the air, with the British Prime Minister meeting a string of pro-Brexit Conservatives this Sunday at her Chequers country residence. Now, according to various news reports, Theresa May is trying to ward off a potential coup to topple her. She needs to get Parliament to pass her Brexit text in the next few days or risk the UK crashing out of the EU with no deal in April. Now, the Norwegian luxury cruise liner, the Viking Sky, has been towed to port. This after nearly 500 passengers had been airlifted. The ship sent out a Mayday distress signal on Saturday after experiencing engine trouble. According to the Norwegian Red Cross, many of the passengers will need care after the trauma they experienced on board. That's it from me. Thank you very much for watching.